Imagine your hometown, the streets you learned to ride a bike on, the church where your grandparents were married, the cemetery where your great-grandparents are buried. Now imagine it doesn't exist anymore. Not bombed, not burned, not destroyed by war, just underwater. Somewhere beneath a lake you might have visited for vacation, there are streets that haven't seen sunlight in decades, schoolhouses where children still have desks, homes where dinner plates are still on the table. And here's the part that should disturb you. The government knew exactly what they were doing. They drew the maps, they built the dams, they watched the water rise, and they told the people living there, progress requires sacrifice. Your town is the price. What I'm about to tell you isn't one story, it's dozens. Towns flooded by design, communities erased for the greater good, and in at least one case, a town that's been on fire for over 60 years and will keep burning for 2 centuries more. This is the story of the American towns they erased from the map. Let me take you to Nevada, not to Las Vegas, not to the desert you imagine, to Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States. Today, it's a playground. Houseboats, jet skis, vacationers drinking beer in the sun. But when the water drops, really drops, something emerges. A town. St. Thomas was founded in 1865 by Mormon settlers. They came to the muddy river valley because the land was fertile, the water was sweet, and the future seemed wide open. They built homes, they planted crops, they raised children and buried their dead. For 70 years, St. Thomas was just another small American town, quiet, ordinary, alive. Then came the 1930s, the Hoover Dam, progress. The government decided the Colorado River needed to be tamed, needed to provide water and power to cities growing like weeds in the desert. So they built the dam, and behind it, Lake Mead began to fill. The people of St. Thomas watched it happen, slow at first, then faster, the water creeping up Main Street, covering the school, swallowing the church. By 1938, St. Thomas was gone, submerged beneath 200 feet of water. But here's the strange thing, it didn't stay gone. Decades later, droughts began to lower the lake, and one day someone noticed something impossible. The town was coming back. Foundations emerging from the mud, streets reappearing, cellar holes where families once stored their winter food. Today, you can walk the streets of St. Thomas. You can stand where children played, where farmers argued about the price of cattle, where a whole community lived and loved and lost. Then you look up and see the bathtub ring on the cliffs, the white line showing where the water used to be, and you remember, this place is a ghost, temporarily visible, waiting to be drowned again. St. Thomas was erased by design, but it refuses to stay forgotten. Now let me take you to Georgia, to Lake Lanier. If you've ever been to Atlanta, you've probably seen it. 40,000 acres of water, 7 million visitors a year, boating, fishing, swimming, a recreational paradise. But if you're black and from the area, you might know a different story, because beneath those waters lies Oscarville. Oscarville wasn't just a town, it was proof. Proof that freed slaves and their descendants could build something of their own. Established in the late 1800s by people who had been property just decades earlier, Oscarville grew into a thriving black community. Homes, churches, schools, businesses, land owned by black families, dignity built from nothing. Then came the 1950s. Atlanta needed water, needed power, needed to grow. The government built Buford Dam, and Lake Lanier began to fill. Here's where the story gets ugly. When the water rose, it didn't just flood land. It flooded a specific kind of land. Land owned by black families who had worked for generations to acquire it. Land that represented everything America claimed to believe in. Freedom, property, self-determination. The residents of Oscarville were forced out. Their homes, their church, their school, all underwater. Their community erased. And unlike St. Thomas, Oscarville doesn't reemerge during droughts. It's gone, really gone. But here's the part that should make you think. Ask people in Georgia about Lake Lanier, and some will tell you it's haunted. They'll talk about strange accidents, unexplained drownings, a feeling that something's not right beneath those waters.
Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's something true in that feeling. Because when you drown a community, especially a community that was already fighting for its place in the world, you don't just flood land, you flood justice, you flood memory, you flood the proof that people like you once had a place in this country. And that water, it never really clears. Massachusetts, 1930. Boston is growing. Its people are thirsty. Its leaders have a plan. They will take the Swift River Valley, a quiet rural area in the central part of the state, and they will drown it completely, deliberately, permanently. 4 towns stand in the way: Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, and Prescott. 2,000 people call these towns home. They have farms, businesses, schools, churches. They have cemeteries where their ancestors rest. They have lives they didn't ask to sacrifice. But Boston is thirsty, and when cities are thirsty, rural towns pay the price. The government buys the land, condemns it, really. Families are given deadlines. Pack your things, move your dead. Your town is about to become a reservoir. The photograph from 1939 shows it best. A section of Route 21, the road that connected these towns, slowly disappearing beneath rising water. A road people had traveled for generations, now a dead end, now a memory. By 1946, the valley was full. The Quabbin Reservoir held 412 billion gallons of water. Boston drank, the towns drowned. But here's what's interesting. They didn't destroy everything. Dana Common, the heart of one town, sits just above the waterline. You can still walk there today. Cellar holes, stone steps, granite posts where fences once stood. The bones of a town that refused to completely disappear. And if you visit on a quiet day, locals will tell you they can still hear things. Church bells sometimes. Children playing. The echo of a place that was erased for the greater good. The greater good. That phrase should bother you, because it's always someone else's town, someone else's home, someone else's history. The greater good is easy to believe in when you're not the one being sacrificed for it. Now let me take you to Pennsylvania, to a town that wasn't drowned. It burned, and it's still burning. Centralia, Pennsylvania was a coal town, the kind of place where everyone's father worked underground and everyone's mother prayed they'd come back up. At its peak, nearly 3,000 people lived there. 7 churches, 5 hotels, 27 saloons, 2 theaters, a bank, a post office. A real town, a living town. Then came May 1962. The town needed to clean up the landfill. It was an eyesore, sitting in an abandoned strip mine. So the volunteer fire department did what they'd done before. They set it on fire and let it burn. But this time, something went wrong. The fire didn't stop. It found a seam of coal, and it followed that seam down into the labyrinth of mines beneath the town. For years, people pretended it wasn't a problem. Sure, there was smoke sometimes. Sure, the ground felt warm in places, but Centralia was home. You don't leave home because of a little smoke. Then came 1979. A gas station owner, the mayor actually, checked his underground tanks and found something impossible. The gasoline was 172 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than any gas should ever be. 2 years later, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking through his grandmother's backyard when the ground opened beneath him. A sinkhole, 150 feet deep, filled with steam and lethal carbon monoxide. He saved himself by grabbing a tree root and holding on until his cousin pulled him out. That was the moment everyone knew. The fire wasn't going anywhere, and neither could they. By 1983, the government had spent $42 million relocating residents. Over 1,000 people left. 500 buildings were demolished. The town that had been there for over a century was essentially gone. But here's the thing about Centralia. A handful of people refused to leave. Even today, a few residents remain. They fought the government in court. They won the right to stay until they die. And when they die, their homes will be taken. Their town will finally, completely cease to exist. The fire beneath them, it's still burning. It's spread across 13 kilometers of coal seams. Experts say it could burn for another 250 years. Think about that. 250 years from now, when we're all dust and memory, that fire will still be burning, still consuming what's left of Centralia, still reminding us that some erasures take longer than others. Today, you can drive through on Route 61, or what's left of it. The section they abandoned is called Graffiti Highway, covered in paint and memories, closed now, buried under dirt because too many people came to see what a dying town looks like. But if you stop and look, you'll see steam rising from cracks in the earth. You'll see warning signs, danger, toxic gases, unstable ground. And you'll realize this town isn't dead. It's dying, slowly, publicly, for centuries. There's something honest about that, maybe. Most erasers are hidden, underwater, under silence, under history books that don't mention the names. But Centralia wears its erasure on the surface. Smoke rising, ground burning, a town that refuses to go quietly, even as it's consumed from below. Now let me show you the pattern, because St. Thomas, Oscarville, the Quabbin Towns, Centralia, they're not exceptions, they're examples. All across America, towns have been erased for dams, for reservoirs, for progress, for the greater good. In Alabama, they drowned Eastonville, Benson, Susanna, Riverton, Irma, Bainbridge, Prairie Bluff, dozens of communities, black and white, rich and poor, gone beneath the water. In some cases, they moved the bodies first. 30,000 graves relocated across the Tennessee Valley alone. Families invited to watch their ancestors dug up and reburied somewhere the water couldn't reach. In other cases, they didn't. There were graves beneath those lakes, bodies that were left because no family could be found, or because the family said no, or because the government just didn't get around to it. Boaters on Lake Martin will tell you they've heard church bells ringing from the depths. Scientists say it's impossible, but the legend persists because we need the dead to remind us that something was lost. And here's the pattern within the pattern. It's never the powerful who pay the price. It's the rural, the poor, the black, the forgotten, the people without lobbyists or lawyers or friends in Congress. St. Thomas was remote. Oscarville was black. The Quabbin Towns were small and far from Boston. Centralia was working-class coal country. Progress doesn't ask permission. It just takes what it needs and calls it inevitable. And the people who lose their homes, they become footnotes, ghost stories, warnings that no one heeds because the water is so pretty and the boat rentals are so cheap. But here's what the planners didn't understand. You can drown a town. You can burn it. You can demolish every building and relocate every resident. But you can't kill the memory. In Nevada, when drought lowers Lake Mead, people come to walk the streets of St. Thomas. They pick up artifacts, carefully, respectfully, and wonder about the lives lived there. In Georgia, descendants of Oscarville's residents still gather. They tell stories, they remember names, they make sure their children know that once their people had a place, and that place was taken. In Massachusetts, you can visit Dana Common, walk the cellar holes, touch the granite steps that led to someone's front door. Imagine the family that sat on that porch on summer evenings watching the same sunset you're watching now. And in Pennsylvania, people still come to Centralia. Despite the warnings, despite the dirt they piled on Graffiti Highway, they come to see the steam rising from the earth, to feel the warmth of a fire that will outlive them, to stand in a place that's dying and think about what it means to be alive. These towns are gone, but they're not forgotten. Because memory has a way of surviving in stories, in photographs, in the questions children ask and the answers parents give. The government can flood your home, but it can't flood your history, not unless you let it. Here's the question that should keep you awake. What's being erased right now, today, in your lifetime? Because it's not just towns anymore. It's cultures, languages, ways of life that took thousands of years to develop and decades to destroy. Every 2 weeks, a language dies somewhere in the world, not because it was outlawed,
Because the last person who spoke it passed away, and the next generation chose English or Spanish or Mandarin because that's where the money is. Every year, indigenous communities lose elders who carry knowledge that exists nowhere else. Medicinal plants, navigation techniques, stories that explain why the world is the way it is. And we call it progress. Just like we called drowning St. Thomas progress. Just like we called relocating Oscarville progress. Just like we called sacrificing the Quabbin Towns progress. The names change, the justifications change, but the pattern remains. Someone decides that your place doesn't matter, your history doesn't matter, your connection to the land doesn't matter. And then they take it. Not with malice, usually, just with efficiency, with paperwork, with the greater good. But the result is the same. Another town erased, another community scattered, another set of stories that will never be told again.
But here's the thing about erasure. It's never complete. Because towns aren't just buildings, they're memories. And memories don't drown. When Lake Mead drops, St. Thomas rises. When families gather, Oscarville lives. When you walk down a common, you feel the presence of people who haven't existed for 90 years. And when you stand in Centralia and watch steam rise from cracks in the earth, you understand. Some fires never go out. These towns are gone, but they're not dead. They're waiting. Waiting for someone to ask, what was here before the water, before the fire, before the government decided that progress required sacrifice? Waiting for someone to care enough to remember. And maybe that's the most radical act of all. Not building something new, just remembering what was lost. They told them it was for the greater good. And maybe it was, but the greater good has a terrible habit of requiring someone else's home.